Welcome everyone to today's Fireside Chat. I'm super excited to be back with you all. We had a break in between the summertime and now we're back. And today we're back to talk about global mental health. So before we jump into our segment today, I just want to encourage you to share this message out. Mental health, as we know, is affecting so many of us. Maybe some of us that are watching right now. And what we like to do in our platform is to really elevate this message, uplift it so that we're empowering you with what you need to deal with everyday challenges and stressors. And today we're going to be specifically focusing on what war is doing to our kids globally, not just in the US, but also across and overseas. And today we have an incredible guest with us, Nathalie, and she's going to be talking to us about her work. She's the CEO and founder of First Aid of the Soul. And she'll be talking about the work that she's been doing in Ukraine. And I'm really honored. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here and look forward to hearing your feedback today. I would love for this to be very engaging. So yeah, pleasure to be here.
Yes. And guys, I just want to give you a quick update. Some of you may have been following what I've been doing, but I am actually currently a student, a mid-career student at Harvard University Kennedy School of Government. I am still CEO of I Raise Girls and Boys. That has not changed. But in my work here, a part of my goal is to really start to scale our work globally outside of the US. And so I'm really, really excited about this day. As you know, we really care about mental health, and I'm honored to have Nathalie here to talk about the work that she's been doing. So what I'm going to do is read her bio, and we'll jump into some questions. But in between that, we do want it to be engaging. So if you have questions or if there's something that really lands with you, go ahead and put it into the chat box, share it with us, and also do us a favor and share this message out. Nathalie Timtchenko is a clinical mental health professional and expressive arts therapist with a multicultural background, currently pursuing a mid-career Master of Public Administration at Harvard Kennedy School, graduating in May 2025. She founded and leads First Aid of the Soul, providing mental health support to Ukrainians affected by war, serving 500 individuals monthly and over 10,000 in total. Timtchenko specializes in supporting diverse communities facing challenges like trauma, acculturation, and crisis. She has authored a chapter on war's mental health impacts and is working on another focusing on children. Timtchenko has presented at 25 conferences during the past 2 years, as well as lectures, events and roundtables, and discussions around mental health and trauma. Her vigor is a formidable catalyst for social change, particularly in the face of injustice. Her dedication to aiding individuals and communities of all ages and backgrounds is propelled by a desire for prominent positive impact in the field of global health. Thank you again. That's incredible. And I learned some new things about you. So that's awesome. How about we start off with your why into this work? It's not scripted, but I'm just curious. I always admire fellow colleagues and just wondering what got you into this work?
Oh, that's a very difficult question to answer shortly. But I guess from a young age, I'll speak to the feeling of moving around a lot. So I grew up in different places, and the arts was something I could always take with me. So I was a huge fan of, I still am, of singing and playing piano. And so this was something that I carried on throughout my childhood, and also was, I didn't have to have a specific destination in order to use that part of myself and expression. And moving around for anyone is challenging, especially if it's different cultures, even if it's a different city, it can have a very different sense of belonging and connection within that community. So I would say kind of what led me to this sphere in particular of expressive arts was using that as my own coping strategy amidst change and amidst adversity. And so I would I would say that's what drew me to the field of expressive arts. But with that, I also, one of my sisters has a developmental disability. And so this was also a big piece within my life and our family's life of feeling of belonging and connecting with our community around us. And so I was always drawn to the helping profession and using our inner strengths and also creative side to be a source of healing and a source of coping amidst many different challenges that we face in our day-to-day. So that is a very short version, but I can keep going.
No, I mean, I would love to hear more, but it sounds like you have been able to rise above a lot of the challenges you faced as a child. And I think it's incredible that you are bringing the arts into this space. It's really essential to healing. And I think like music and art is such a universal language that we can understand and heal from in all different parts of the world. So I really love that you're bringing arts in. So today is World Mental Health Day, and we started off by talking about what's going on in the global world. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about your work, especially in Ukraine, and what are you noticing, and how kids are affected by this war, and what are some other things that we should be thinking about?
So the full-scale invasion happened in Ukraine in 2022, which many of you know, but the war's actually been ongoing for over 10 years now, since 2014. But since 2022, I started a nonprofit called First Aid of the Soul, and our primary goal is to make mental health services accessible. And so initially it started as supporting mental health professionals, colleagues there that I had built relationships with, for over 8 years of living there in Kiev. And so it was just a project initially, right? But it turned into so much more. We were able to recruit volunteers from all over the world to provide free support and free trainings, but not just whatever kind of trainings, but really specific to what it means to work with ongoing crisis and ongoing war. So anything from psychological first aid trainings to trauma-informed care, what that looks like in a classroom setting, what that looks like in homes and bomb shelters. And so that was kind of our primary focus, was just to make it accessible, but also give tools, real tools that these professionals and non-mental health professionals could use as a caregiver role for themselves and those they're supporting. What it looks like, it's really hard to say because the needs are changing and have been changing. At this stage, 2.5 years since the full-scale invasion, the needs have turned from distress. The distress is still there, but it's turned more into exhaustion. And especially for my colleagues, they're getting tired. In Ukraine, I'm sure you've seen from the news, like they're some of the most resilient people you will ever meet, and they still are. I'm not discounting that by any means, but they are getting tired. And so that is part of our mission, is to support them as best we can in their work, giving them new tools, giving them hope, a sense of knowing that they're not alone in this. And with children, again, it varies depending on the regions, but people are afraid of what mental health means. Especially in Ukraine, it has a history of oppression, centuries of oppression. Psychology itself was used as a weapon and still is in some cases, where it's used as a way to manipulate people or lock them up if they disagree. This was during Soviet times. And there's actually a lot of research around this that it was used as a way to kind of get rid of them and put them away if they disagreed with what was happening in the government. That said, it has shifted a lot, tremendously in the last 2 years, especially since the First Lady of Ukraine started promoting mental health and promoting what it means to support children in schools, and acknowledge that, hey, there's a war going on, but we also need to make sure that we're staying mentally sane to cope through this together. So I can keep going, but the needs are really giving children a sense of normalcy around their stress, around their fears, having real conversations that are difficult, but acknowledging what is going on and why is really important, no matter their age. And this is something that I faced working there in different school settings prior to the full-scale invasion, is that a lot of caregivers, a lot of parents are afraid to have difficult conversations with their children because they're afraid of that, them knowing how they are wanting to feel or respond. And so normalizing the need for seeking mental health support, for having conversations about fear, depression, anxiety. This is something that we're trying to also normalize within our work, but also encourage teachers to have conversations, especially with students. How can you learn when there's air raids going on and you're having to evacuate a classroom to get to a bomb shelter for safety? And that's if they have access to a shelter and access to Wi-Fi and joining on Zoom. Thankfully, we have Zoom these days. But yeah, so I hope that answers a bit of the question, but I'm happy to go into more details.
I think it was very rich, and you really zoomed out for us around what's happening with people in general in Ukraine, and how people are affected. In a sense, their humanity is at risk. And talking about children that are in schools and having to evacuate from their school and in the middle of the school day. What is it? What the cost of that? The emotional, the mental cost, not just now, but in future generations. What does it look like? And I know safety and security is prioritized physically, but then I think again we missed out the piece, the psychological piece. Like what is war doing to our kids? I'm curious if you have any stories about maybe one or two families that are dealing with this right now, maybe here or in Ukraine, and sort of making it real for people that are listening. What are some of the things that they're facing?
I would be happy to. So this summer, and I won't disclose like names or locations, but we worked with families on the ground in Ukraine. We trained a team of 12 psychotherapists from around the country that we recruited. And the whole idea was to build a family-centric model for a respite camp. So we brought in families from northern regions of Ukraine, which is very close to the border, that have experienced some kind of loss, many of whom had experienced very recent loss of a loved one, loss of homes, displacement internally. And so very vulnerable families, but also the most resilient. I don't say that lightly, but the most resilient people I've ever met. An example, we had one mother who had been looking for her husband who went missing in the first few months of the full-scale invasion. He was an active service member, soldier, and he went missing. They were looking for him for 11 months, 5 children. One had just been born shortly before the full-scale invasion. And if you just saw her coming in to the camp, like you would have no idea what she experienced, because she was smiling, she was dancing, She was holding her children. She is a very, very good mother. But the resilience there and just the care that you saw within the family dynamics, this is not every family, of course, but in that, with what they experienced, to later find out that her husband did die and he was killed. It's devastating. And the fact that she's now able to, what she shared that she took from the camp experience was that she feels like she got to know her children in a very different way, but also got to know herself. And so having that experience of being in a relatively safer area of the country, to get some tools for, again, coping through. It's not coping to the point of, okay, well, now I'm moving on, but at least I can cope through this, and I have some additional tools that I can use for myself, and for my family, as we move forward. So that's one example of just resilience, and also that idea that using the family as a support system is key, especially when you're holding so much grief and so much loss in your day to day, and the new normal is basically not normal. And so this piece, I think, is really important to understand that this is their new normal, but it's not okay. And so how do we cope with the not okay on a day-to-day basis? Another example is of a little boy who did lose his dad. And this was very interesting because he's 5 years old, and there was a conversation that happened of, why do you feel like you need to protect your mom so much? This was at the same camp. And he said, well, because who else is going to protect her? 5 years old. Dad's gone, and I have a little sister. And so the conversation back was, but you're 5. Don't you think mom should take care of you? No, I'm strong. And I share this because this is also a shift of, amazing little boy, super strong, by the way. He some legit muscles. But the fact that he's sharing as a 5-year-old how he is now responsible for his mother and his younger sister. And he wasn't wrong. Mom wasn't able to really take care of herself. And I think by being part of the camp, she did regain a sense of self through being there, and also by being in community with other families. But it's just to acknowledge that these children are losing their childhood, and they're losing their right to have that fun, creative side of not feeling like they have to defend and protect their life and their family. On the flip side of working with families that have been displaced outside of the country, I would say it's very different. It varies depending on if they're living outside of the country in Europe, so they're relatively close to Ukraine. They can go back home occasionally. But in the States, I don't know if many people know this, but once you come here on the U4U status, it's an amazing opportunity, but it also means you are staying here. You don't have the luxury of going back. And so it is a commitment, because you're saying no to that possibility of going back home. And so it's a big decision. And so the families here, a lot of them are having difficulty adjusting, because it's a very different culture. It's a beautiful culture, but different. And it varies depending on where you are in the US, as far as like the receptivity and how you're received as an immigrant and refugee. some are more welcoming than others. And so this idea of adjusting to a new place, being grateful for this new place and the safety, while also having loved ones in Ukraine that are facing horrors on a daily basis, it's really like your worlds are two different pieces, and so that means they're having a really hard time really adjusting here and being present here, finding jobs,
Yeah.
getting assimilated into schools, learning the language. How do I get my driver's license? um, what kind of job can I even get? In Ukraine, I was a doctor. Now I'm working at, Starbucks. Nothing wrong
Yeah.
with Starbucks, but it's just a very different shift of worlds, and also identity for these families. And I would also say, just to end on that piece, but many of the families that you'll speak to from Ukraine here in the States, they plan to go back. And so this is very different, because I have worked with displaced people from all over the world, but Ukrainians are different in the sense that they have this expectation that they will be going back
Yeah.
home, which is a really important piece for them to hold on to. But it also makes their transitioning here very difficult, because there's this idea that, well, I can't commit fully because I'm going to go back. And when?
Yeah. And it's interesting you say that. First, thank you so much for the work that your organization is doing on the ground, on the front lines, holding space and safety and bravery for these families that are dealing with tremendous and complex loss and trauma on a day to day. It's interesting when you think about mental health and you're working with families, typically you're dealing with something of the past, but to deal with ever present trauma, it is so complex. It's so it's also really scary. And the fact that your organization's on the front lines, I just really commend you all for your courage and for your work. Um, on what's going on here. So I know we have children in the US that are also either they've come over from other places, whether we didn't talk about like Israel, but we know there are also children there that's deeply, deeply, deeply affected by the war in Israel and Gaza. And I know there are also wars going on in other places like Sudan. We have a classmate who talks about like his uncle and losing their home and their loved ones. And so it's really interesting. It feels like we're in this really interesting place in the world where it's almost like pain is rising and humanity is at risk through this conflict throughout the world. And so it affects all of us deeply. Right here in the US, there are children, their families that are also affected, not just by war, but by other things. I'm wondering if you can speak to just some tangible things that we can do to sort of um, uh, support our own selves, our own mental health. Um, it may sound a little awkward to some folks that may not consider it, but how do we stay mentally well through all of the things that are happening?
I think it's a really important question, because you can only take so much news, right? And if the news isn't in your face, you see it other places. You see it on, I'm not a TikTok person, but you see it on TikTok, Instagram, social media, different channels, through conversations. And it's on one hand, I think it is important to stay aware of what's happening outside of your own, I don't want to say bubble, but your bubble, your community. I think it's very important to stay informed. Does that mean you need to know everything in every detail and see every image? Definitely not. And I think there's a balance there of how much you can take in.
Sure.
Um, and as far as responding and how do we hold that, I'm a little biased because I'll say the arts, but
Yeah.
but in reality, it's about finding your own way of taking in information and not just like streamlining it in and out, but finding a way to express how it makes you feel and how it impacts the conversations you're having with people around you. If you're a child, you can do so much, through your conversations at school, through the conversations you have at home around the dinner table. Maybe instead of being on your phone, not just speaking to the teens and younger generations, but in general, like making an effort to really build a sense of community within your own homes it's really important. And it also is a way to model like what that looks like for your children and for schools and for just what it means to find connection with other beyond mobile devices and social media. But I mean, that's one practical example of just having real conversations and not being afraid of the responses you will get from people around you. And then I would also say something that's I feel is lacking, and this is where when I did a lot of work with especially teens back in Ukraine before the full-scale invasion, we did a lot of work around values and finding a sense of meaning. And I feel like this has been washed out quite a bit today because there are so many options of who you can be, where you can go, and especially in the more Western cultures, it's very like it's popular to like you can be anything, you can do everything, which is a great concept, but it also is confusing, especially for you're already going through all the different developmental stages and who am I, but being able to really get to know yourself and challenge parts of yourself to get to understanding like what does give you a sense of fulfillment and a sense of joy and peace, and using that as a way to cope through the challenges that you're sitting with. And so, for example, if you're a good writer and you like writing, but you're not so, fond of speaking aloud, maybe it's writing responses to what you're seeing around you and the pain that you're seeing around you. Maybe it's by doing advocacy and, putting up posters in your schools and near your home and with your friends. Social media is a great outlet for that. It could be through fundraising, different, finding an NGO or a local organization that you're passionate about their mission and supporting them and just sharing about the work that they're doing. You're never too young to be an advocate, and you can be an advocate for things that you are passionate about. As far as like another layer of like what you can do, I would say the biggest thing you can do is just being real and don't be afraid of the hard conversations.
That's it. That one there is huge. I was in last night in a small group, and I don't think I'm at liberty because of Harvard's non-attribution policy, but in this particular small group, it's really interesting how, apologize guys, my puppy is barking, but it's really interesting how we avoid these really difficult conversations. And it's easier to act like it doesn't exist, but it's very paradoxical because it does. And you can see the frustration and the pain that people hold that are facing and are dealing with things overseas, but they're not, it's almost like this non-written law that says you can't talk about it, and not talking about it and silencing and what that's doing to people's pain. It's suppressing it, but it's certainly not eliminating it. So I think naming it is essential. therapists, social workers, teachers working with schools to hold these brave and safe spaces for parents and children to talk about what's going on, to process it. Not naming it, avoiding it doesn't make it go away.
Definitely.
Yeah. I know we're over time, but there was a video that I wanted everyone to see about your work in closing this segment. And so I'm hoping that we can share that video and maybe hear some last closing word from you.
Yeah.
Oh, I think sorry, no, I think the video is going up.
So happy to be here in Ukraine with dear colleagues that we've been supporting over the last year due to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. We came here to be able to really show our support in person and support our colleagues here, and also just show a little bit about how the arts can be impactful, especially when you're working with children, when you're working with trauma, ongoing trauma. So the arts, as well as other holistic approaches, can be really impactful and go beyond words. And that's what we believe with First Aid of the Soul, and that's why we're doing this work.
Дуже приємно і дуже цінно те, що ми отримуємо підтримку від колег з Європи, з Америки, з Японії, з Австралії. Ой, це неймовірно цінно через те, що ми розуміємо, що дійсно люди за нас хвилюються, дійсно люди переживають і намагаються нам допомогти, незалежно від відстані, яка нас розділяє. І ми таким чином знаємо, що ми не самі, а що світ нас бачить, світ нас чує і світ нам допомагає. І це абсолютно не соромно, тому що нам потрібен позитив для того, щоб пройти через оцей негатив.
Ми не очікували такого результату, що ми будемо робити такі супермаски. Ми не очікували того, що діти настільки впишуться в цей проект, що, скажімо, нам було дуже цікаво, дуже корисно з усіх сторін. Ви настільки запалили дітей, ви настільки змогли їх до себе розкрити, що вони, ви бачили, з якими посмішками пішли.
З того, що ви робите, найкраще – це коли ви приїжджаєте сюди. Це дійсно показує, по-перше, вашу певну безстрашність, по-друге, зацікавленість і оце чесне переживання за нас.
Люди, бережіть мир, бережіть те, що є зараз, на сьогоднішній день. Ось цей мир, ось цю любов, цих людей, які поруч з вами.
Що важливо, ми зараз знаходимося в ситуації тут, а наші колеги, які знаходяться поза межами України, в більш ресурсному стані. І це дуже важливо, що ми можемо спертися на вас, спертися на вашу допомогу, побачити ваші усміхнені обличчя. І такий ще важливий момент, у вас світло є, і коли ми можемо до вас підключитися, це насправді для нас важливо.
We had the pleasure of meeting many beautiful children today and working with dear colleagues. Really, it was just a time to meet with them and also show them their inner strengths and hopefully give them just a little bit of happiness in their day-to-day that they can take with them as a memory and remember that they're not alone through this very difficult time in Ukraine.
Absolutely beautiful, absolutely moving. I'm like holding back the tears, but just beautiful, beautiful. Any last words that you can close us off with?
About those children, because it's not very clear in the video because they're all smiling. This was in January 2023, so a little less than a year after the full-scale invasion, and I would say at least half of those children in that room had been under occupation within the first few months. And so you can imagine the amount of trauma that they're carrying with them. And The other half mostly had been internally displaced, so they had relocated to Kiev for safety reasons. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that, because these are not your average like children. They're very resilient. And when I initially offered the workshop, it was just supposed to be a fun way to like engage and give them some tools, and I wasn't expecting much engagement, actually. And this is my own bias coming in thinking like, oh, it's going to be so difficult, and how are they going to be like talking about superheroes when they're like literally superheroes every day.
Yeah.
But that's actually where the beauty of it is we started off by telling, what are some things you like, what are some things that keep you going, what are some things that you feel like give you a sense of superhero strength. And so we built off of that as we got started, and it was really amazing to see how just full of life they are. So definitely a pleasure to do this work, and honor to do this work, and thank you again so much for having us on the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for providing context to what we were seeing and the trauma and pain of those children. I absolutely love your approach: empowerment, community, family centered, and finding ways to help kids tap into their inner strength, their inner superpower that they all have, in the midst of this so much pain that's around them. And I hope that those that are watching, whether you're a therapist or social workers or moms or teachers or dads, community members, that you can sort of learn from some of the work that First Aid of the Soul is doing, and ways that they're helping kids to tap into their own strength. And also encouraging all of you, wherever you're watching, locally, New York, Northeast, US, outside of the US, to remember that we all have that inner strength. There's a resilience that we all have that's inside. And then I encourage everyone to tap into your inner strength, to tap into your superpower, to tap into your community, to tap into your family, and to know that you are certainly not alone, even if you feel alone in this day. To know that there are people that care, there are people that are for you, that are rooting for you. There's so many resources, and we'll put it up in the chat box as well. But there's so many resources that exist to support you. So we just want you to know that we're literally all in this together. So thank you so much for joining us today for today's show. Continue uplifting mental health. It's Global Mental Health Day, not just today, but every day. Check on someone that you love, that maybe you haven't heard from in a while, and just say, I'm checking on you. Are you okay? Let's normalize being there for each other. Thank you again. Thank you so much. How can people follow your work, donate, or reach out to you?
So we have some links in the chat. Definitely follow our newsletter. We promise we will not spam you. We send them out once a month. But if you're interested in hearing more of our ongoing projects, that's probably the best way, is via the newsletter. If you're interested in supporting our work, you can reach out to me directly. And we have links in the website as well for donations. But I would love to just share about our work. So we're always looking for collaborations, and in fact, we're working on a project that's to bridge school systems with some local schools in the U.S. to Ukrainian schools, just as a way to like establish some pen pal relationships.
Love it.
I know we're going back to pen pal days, but
yes.
But if you're interested in discussing that possibility as well, it's an exciting project in the works. So
yeah.
Thank you so much.
We work with schools in New York City, so you got a partner already. iRaise does this work locally, and we're looking to do it globally. So let's partner off this and talk about how we can make that happen.
That'd be amazing.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Thank you so much for watching. We really appreciate your support. Do us a favor and uplift this message by sharing it out to your loved ones or your networks or your colleagues. And we will be back. Firesides are now every other week. We've changed the schedule. It used to be every week, but with so much going on with my studies, we have reduced it to every other week. So our next Fireside will air in 2 weeks. Please stay tuned, stay connected, follow our YouTube channel, reach out to us if you need anything. We're here for you.